All right, lace up those boots, folks. Today we're setting off on an incredible journey, tracing John Muir's 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf of Mexico.
And we're not just talking about retracing his steps.
Right, we're going deeper.
We're diving into his personal journal entries from 1867.
Raw and unfiltered, right? Before they were polished for publication.
Exactly. It's a glimpse into his evolving thoughts and observations.
So picture this. A young John Muir, barely in his late 20s.
Recovering from a serious eye injury sustained in a factory accident.
Ouch, that had to be a turning point.
It was. It forced him to rethink his path, his purpose.
And that led him to this incredible journey.
Did. He sets off on foot from Indiana all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, seeking solace and answers in the natural world.
1,000 miles. To devote his life to, as he called it, the inventions of God.
Precisely. The natural world became his sanctuary, his study.
All this just a few years after the Civil War.
Imagine the landscape he was walking through, the South still bearing the scars of conflict.
A nation in transition, and he's walking right through the heart of it.
With his plant press in hand, ready to document every detail.
Okay, let's follow those footsteps. Where does this epic adventure begin?
We start in Kentucky, and Muir is immediately struck by the vast oak forests.
He was amazed by those, wasn't he?
He was. He called Kentucky the Eden, the paradise of oaks. A stark contrast to the landscapes he knew in the north.
It's like he's stepping into a whole new world.
Exactly. The sheer abundance and diversity of life just blew him away.
He wasn't just walking. He was observing, absorbing, meticulously recording his findings.
He had a scientific mind, a keen eye for detail. But he wasn't just a detached observer.
No, there's a real sense of wonder in his writing.
Definitely. There's a passage where he describes encountering a ferryman and his young son perched on a horse like, as Muir puts it, a bug.
And later, in a village, an elder approaches him, fascinated by his plant press.
They're curious about his work, about the stranger studying plants. And Muir, he engages with them. He shares his passion for the natural world.
I remember that story about a farmer who questioned him, asking, what's the use of studying plants?
Ah, yes. And Muir, he responds with the clever biblical argument. He says, if Solomon, in all his wisdom, found plants worthy of study, who are we to disagree?
He even brings up Jesus, telling his disciples to consider the lilies. It's a witty retort.
It is, but it also reveals something profound about Muir's perspective.
It's not just about scientific observation for him.
It's deeper than that. He sees the study of nature as a spiritual pursuit.
A way to connect with something larger than himself.
Absolutely. And that perspective will only deepen as his journey continues.
Speaking of continuing, our next stop is the Cumberland Mountains. What caught Muir's attention in those rugged landscapes?
The mountain streams. He was completely captivated by them.
They really seemed to speak to him, didn't they?
They did. He describes one as one of nature's coolest and most hospitable places. He spends days exploring their banks, carefully documenting the mosses, the ferns, the intricate ecosystems thriving in those cool, rushing waters.
But those mountains also held a bit of danger, right? Wasn't that where he had the run-in with the ex-gorilla?
It was. Can you imagine? Walking alone on a mountain road and suddenly...
10 armed men on horseback appear,
Yeah.
blocking your path.
Exactly. It would be terrifying. But Muir, he remains remarkably calm. Instead of panicking, he walks straight toward them.
What? He didn't?
He did. Offers a friendly howdy and just calmly walks on by.
That's incredible. Do you think his plant press saved him? Maybe they mistook him for some harmless herb doctor.
Muir suspected as much. And, you know, the South was still a volatile place back then.
Recovering from the war, tension still running high. I bet that affected how people treated him on his journey.
Definitely. He experienced a whole spectrum of reactions.
From warm welcomes to wary glances, right?
Right. In one town, a sheriff invites him into his home, offering him hospitality and fascinating conversation.
While in other places, he encounters suspicion, even hostility.
People whose lives have been upended by the war, understandably cautious of strangers.
I remember that anecdote about him sharing a bumpy wagon ride with an old woman, a young couple, and their stubborn mules.
Oh yeah, that's a classic. The wagon practically falling apart, passengers sliding back and forth.
A vivid glimpse into the realities of travel in the post-war South.
It is. And amidst all the discomfort, Muir still finds humor, still sees the beauty in the everyday moments.
He had a remarkable ability to find the positive, even in challenging situations.
He did, and that resilience will serve him well as he enters the next phase of his journey.
Because he's leaving the mountains behind now.
He is. He's entering a vast expanse of pine forests, stretching towards the sea.
The landscape shifting dramatically again.
It is. And with it, a whole new set of challenges and discoveries await him.
A new realm to explore.
Exactly. A realm that will test him, surprise him, and ultimately shape his understanding of the natural world in profound ways.
All right, we're back. Picking up the trail with John Muir as he ventures into those Florida swamps.
This is where things get really interesting.
Right. Last we left off, he was entering this unfamiliar, almost exotic landscape.
Exactly. And it's here that we really start to see Muir's ideas about humanity and nature take shape. He's encountering creatures that most people would consider fearsome.
Alligators, rattlesnakes.
Even venomous spiders. But he doesn't react with the typical fear and disgust.
It's like he sees them as part of a larger whole.
He does. He acknowledges their power, their role in the ecosystem. Like when he describes alligators as formidable dragoons.
He respected them, that's for sure. But I remember that story where he mistakes a rustling in the reeds for an alligator attack.
Oh, yeah. That one's a classic. He's terrified, convinced it's an alligator about to pounce.
But it turns out to be something completely harmless.
And he even pokes fun at himself for overreacting. It just goes to show, even someone as knowledgeable as Muir is still susceptible to those instinctive fears.
It's human nature.
It is. But what's important is that Muir doesn't let fear dictate his actions. He understands that alligators have just as much right to exist as any other creature, even humans.
That's a pretty radical idea for the time, isn't it?
It is. Back then, the prevailing view was that nature was something to be conquered and controlled. But Muir's starting to challenge that.
He's seeing the interconnectedness of it all.
Exactly. And he's questioning the idea that humans are somehow superior to the rest of nature. This theme will become central to his later writings.
It's fascinating to see these ideas taking root during this journey.
It really is. The swamps, as challenging as they are, become this proving ground for his evolving philosophy.
So he's facing his fears, pushing his own boundaries. But what about the landscape itself? Does he find anything else in Florida that contributes to this shift in his thinking?
Well, after the dark, dense swamps, he emerges into a completely different environment.
The Pine Barrens.
Exactly. Wide open spaces, bathed in sunlight, longleaf pines and wiregrass stretching as far as the eye can see.
And he's completely taken by it, isn't he? The stark beauty of it all.
He is. He describes the sunlight filtering through the pines, the wind moving through the grasses. He even compares the grasses to the palms, saying they have more dignity, especially when swaying in the wind.
Interesting. He'd encountered palms earlier in his trip, right?
He had. But he finds something special in the simplicity and resilience of the grasses.
It's like he's finding beauty in unexpected places.
He is, and that's a key part of his message. Beauty can be found anywhere if we're willing to look closely enough.
But he's not romanticizing these pine barrens either. He still encounters signs of the human world.
That's right. He runs into a suspicious young man who questions his motives.
And that family living in a hollow log.
Yes, even naked children. It's a reminder that even as Muir is immersing himself in nature, he's still traveling through a human landscape, a landscape shaped by history, conflict, and social inequalities.
It's like he's constantly balancing these two perspectives, the grandeur of nature and the complexities of human existence.
He is, and that tension leads him to a powerful realization. After weeks of walking, enduring hardship, facing his fears, he finally reaches the Gulf of Mexico.
And witnesses a spectacular sunset.
He does. He describes it as the culmination of his journey.
Like reaching a summit after a long climb.
Exactly. And it's here, on the shores of the Gulf, that Muir seems to come to terms with this duality he's been wrestling with.
He recognizes that beauty and hardship, wonder and struggle, they're all interconnected.
They are inseparable threads in the fabric of life, both human and wild.
It's a powerful realization.
It is. He's moving beyond simple observation. He's seeing the interconnectedness of all things, and this understanding will fuel his later work as a conservationist.
So the journey south has been transformative, but it sounds like his adventures aren't over yet.
Not at all. Just when you think he's heading home, he gets this incredible opportunity, a chance to sail to Cuba.
Cuba. Talk about an unexpected detour.
It is. But before we set sail for Cuba, I'm curious, what's resonated most with you so far about Muir's experiences in Florida?
Cuba. I'm really curious about this part of the story. What exactly leads him there?
Well, his original plan was to sail to Cuba right from Florida.
Oh, right. But then...
He got sick, remember, so he had to stop and recover at Cedar Key.
Right. And that's where things take a turn.
They do. While he's there, A schooner bound for Cuba pulls in.
And Muir never one to miss an opportunity.
Jumps at the chance. He can't resist the allure of a new adventure.
What a guy. So, Cuba, what are his first impressions?
He's struck by the vibrancy of Havana.
I bet. The colors, the music.
It's all there. Bustling markets, people in the streets. He soaks it all in.
And the nature. Does he find those botanical treasures he's always searching for?
Oh, absolutely. He spends his days exploring this rocky outcrop called Morrow Hill, overlooking the harbor.
Beautiful view, I imagine.
It is, but it's the plants that really capture his attention.
Of course. Anything in particular stand out to him?
He's just amazed by the sheer diversity of it all. Towering palms, orchids, delicate ferns clinging to the rocks. It's all there.
I bet his plant press was overflowing by this point.
Probably. There's this one passage I love where he describes finding a tiny legume flower.
A legume.
Yeah. But it's growing amidst these giant trees. Huge palms, massive ceiba trees.
A world of giants.
Exactly. And yet this tiny, delicate flower is thriving right alongside them.
It's a good reminder, isn't it? That even in the most exotic places, those same natural principles apply.
They do. Adaptation, diversity, interconnectedness. It's all there, playing out on different scales.
Makes you think. Does Muir reflect on this at all?
He does. He starts to see nature as this kind of living palimpsest.
Palimpsest?
It's like an ancient manuscript where layers of writing have been added over time.
Oh, I see. Traces of the past layered on the present.
Exactly. He's getting a deeper sense of how interconnected everything is, how each species, each individual is woven into this web that goes back thousands, even millions of years.
Wow. But I hate to bring it up, but the journey back wasn't exactly smooth sailing, was it?
No, it wasn't. On his way back to New York, he runs into a pretty fierce storm.
Oh.
He's on a schooner loaded with oranges, and the ship's getting tossed around by huge waves.
I bet that was scary.
It was. He even writes about it. The wild, passionate music of the wind, the terrible grandeur of the storm.
He really had a way with words, didn't he?
He did. And it's interesting because even someone so connected to nature, so in awe of it,
Can still be humbled by its power.
exactly. It's a good reminder that even as we seek to understand nature, to appreciate it,
We have to respect its power, too.
absolutely. So Muir finally arrives back in New York, completing this incredible journey.
It really was incredible. And in a way, it feels like it's just the beginning for him, you know?
I agree. This 1,000-mile walk was a transformative experience. It shaped his worldview, his life's work.
He went on to do so much. Those amazing books, his conservation efforts.
He truly became a voice for wilderness, for protecting those wild places that meant so much to him. And it all started with this walk.
I think there's a lot we can learn from his journey.
I agree. It reminds us that adventure, discovery, it doesn't have to be in some far-off land.
It can be right outside our doors.
Exactly. If we're willing to slow down, pay attention, and approach the world with a sense of curiosity, like Muir did.
It's a call to action, too, isn't it? To protect those wild places, to appreciate the interconnectedness of it all.
Absolutely. Maybe we can't all walk 1,000 miles, but we can all do our part, connect with nature, advocate for its protection, and live in a way that honors that interconnectedness.
Beautifully said. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into John Muir's 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf.
It does.
Until next time, folks, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep,